We already have the first part of this module. Now, we are going to work on the second part, which is the one that is related to your repressive states, which is a component of yourself which is responsible for punishing you so that you avoid any situation that could cause you pain. And it does so by generating in you a state of compulsive fear and, above all, guilt, precisely so that you avoid what you want. So, the idea here is that in the corresponding section of your psychic map, you first write down what are the things that you repress, what you want but refuse either out of fear or guilt. And just as we did with the compulsions, in the first box, you are going to write down your recent repressions and those that have been most significant to you throughout your life. Usually, these repressions are generated by the fear that there are people who may think badly of you or because you do not want to hurt yourself. An example of repression could be the fact that I want to buy something because I really like it, but I am afraid of what others will think of me if I do so. Or it could also be that you would like to experience something in life, such as learning some type of instrument, or dressing in a certain way, or even putting on makeup, or interacting with some people. But you don't do it because you hold back from experimenting what you want. So, once you have defined what you have been repressing and what you are repressing in the present, the idea is that in the following table, you write down when this repression is activated and what consequence it has for you. In the first case, I want you to think about the moment you are in when the desire that you repress arises and associated with which people. You may be with your father or mother in a family conversation, and that is where you remember that there is something you want, but you are avoiding doing it. And after that, you must write down the consequence that this repressive state brings for you. If you look at it, it is very similar to compulsion because the consequence is that you develop a state of frustration or annoyance for wanting something and not being able to get it. And that is why many people who repress what they want enter states of annoyance and end up taking it out on other people who are not to blame for what they repress. That is why it is so important that you learn to recognize what you repress, because this way you will be able to become aware of what you want and eventually accept it and achieve it. That is the purpose of this exercise. And finally, we come to the third component of this process of psychic balance, which is the state of the self, whose function is precisely to balance these compulsive and repressive forces with which you must deal in your daily life. Therefore, you already know that if you enter states of imbalance that in turn cause anxiety, frustration, or anger, for example, it is because you repress what you want and you feel guilty for it, or because you have become a prisoner of repressions that hurt you. So, how do we balance yourself when you face some kind of repression? Well, by regulating precisely those forces that grow in your being given certain circumstances to which you expose yourself. That was the purpose of the first exercise. So, when any repression arises, you must remember that deep down, what you are doing through that act is avoiding some type of punishment. I don't risk going for what I want because I fear suffering in the process. But what if I told you that you can transform that feeling of punishment into a situation of achievement? To do this, the technique that we are going to use is the following. Once you have recognized the repression you are subjecting yourself to, I want you to think about what is the worst thing that could happen to you if you dare to go for what you want and write it down in the corresponding box. You may write, I am afraid that my mother or a relative or someone who is related to my family may have a bad image of me. If you like someone, the worst thing that could happen to you is that they reject you and you will never see them again. The possibilities are endless. You define that. But by doing this exercise, you will realize that as conflicting as this might be, in practice, it is not as terrible as it might seem. That is what I want to induce in you through this exercise. And finally, once you have realized that the consequence of following your desires was not so terrible, the next thing I want you to do is think and write in the following box what you could gain if you get what you want, and what you could gain even if you don't get what you want. You notice that this completely changes the perspective and fear that you previously felt for daring to overcome your repressive states. I am going to give you some examples so you can see how all this works. If you like someone but you don't dare to go for that person because you are afraid, I know, that he or she may reject you, but you realize that it is not such a terrible thing, what you could achieve if you go for what you want is that she or he could eventually be your girlfriend or your boyfriend. You could enjoy his or her company and satisfy all your fantasies on an erotic level. If, on the other hand, he or she rejects you, the best thing that could happen to you is that you will be free to look for a person who really values you. You will realize that that person does not love you, but by breaking that bond, you will regain your freedom to stop being tied to someone who will eventually hurt you. This is precisely how we balance yourself when some repression is affecting you very strongly.